Hello, everyone, and welcome to this second in our monthly series of Communicating on Climate webinars with Michael Shank. My name is Ian Hitchcock. I'm an organizer with the Vermont Natural Resources Council and the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network. And on today's webinar, we're going to be looking at a couple of ways of looking at communications. We're going to be focusing on moments and memes in this hour. So we're going to be talking about some ideal moments to communicate about climate, focusing on the recent release of the Energy Action Network's annual report on where we stand for our greenhouse gas emissions, and walk through some examples of how that might be a great opportunity to communicate in communities. And apologies for my phone going off here, folks, but we'll also be talking about some memes and how memes can be useful in communicating to people. And I'll go through some of the kind of local policy fixes, local policy proposals put forward by the legislature, and talk about how we could use kind of online engagement, memes and others to try to influence the discussion and really act on climate. So at this point, I am going to turn things over to Mr. Michael Shank. Michael is the communications director for the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, which is a group of international cities around the world committed to achieving long-term aggressive carbon reduction. He was also our keynote speaker at the VECAN conference this last year, and has been very gracious and willing to share his communications expertise with us. Also serves on the Brandon Energy Committee and on some of the regional planning commissions down there. So he's got some local and international expertise to bring to us. So Michael, thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
All right. Hey everyone, thanks Ian. And I was just saying it's so sunny outside, so if you're skipping this call or plan to skip this call because you need some vitamin D, I fully understand. It's a happy sunny Tuesday, and I assume the sun is shining down on you as well. All right, so let's jump in. We're going to focus fully on this EAN report because that was the last conversation for VECAN and VNRC. So let's just build off that and the previous presentation, previous webinar that Ian and his crew hosted with Johanna and Sarah. So if you haven't seen the memes coming out of their report, I'm just going to highlight some of them here. And if you don't have access to them, Ian, do you want to quickly say where folks can access these social media posts?
Sure. So the social media posts are going to be coming from a couple different directions. They're going to be emailed out by the Energy Action Network in a monthly series. They're calling their data download, as they're trying to get this data out and continue to be a presence in communities. That'll be emailed out to Sarah, and we'll be posting that all on our social media channels, so people can find those on the VECAN Facebook page, as well as the Energy Action Network's page. And we'll make sure to keep you all in the loop as to when those data downloads, when those graphics are coming out, so that we can ensure that they make the widest splash possible.
Excellent, thanks Ian. So I'm going to just tick through a bunch of their memes, and then we'll get to some moments and talk about how we can use this material. What I really like about this first Facebook post that they propose is that it's economic framing. If you participated in my last webinar and remember some of the messages that I highlighted, I strongly encouraged economic messaging, health messaging, security messaging, and this, which is their first proposed Facebook post, definitely tracks closely with the economic framing. And I think any good Vermonter who is either conservative or liberal in nature will appreciate this framing, this economic messaging, that we don't want our dollars to leave Vermont. We need them all here. We need to keep the dollars here. I like the visual that EAN provided. You can see it there that they have to include in your Facebook post. It's a nice visual in terms of money draining out of the state, leaving the state, and a whopping 78% of all dollars are leaving the state versus those energy dollars that could be spent in state, which is an important reframe, good economic conservative messaging there for anyone who wants it. Going to go to the second Facebook post that they propose. They do mention equity. The visual doesn't get a whole lot into equity, but where that would matter, and as people talk about the carbon tax in this state, how it falls on people who have to drive the furthest, which is often a community that where equity does come into factor in terms of how we message it. I'd want to work with you on ways we can finesse this, because one of the reasons why the carbon tax has been criticized by conservatives in the state is that it would hit hardest on rural communities or communities that have to travel the furthest. You see transportation being the biggest carbon impact here in the state and most responsible for carbon emissions in the state. And so people driving the furthest, would a tax hurt them? Yes, the bill accounts for that and covers that and provides rebates to those communities. And yet we've still failed on that front. So I would like to take some time at the end of this presentation to talk about how we best message that. I do feel strongly, and why I keep saying memes, I do feel strongly that anything we do does need to be memified and take a little extra creative time and attention to a hashtag that's relevant or a creative framing, because this is a whole conversation happening on social media. Ian's already identified some of the extreme memes that are coming out, thankfully not with a big following, but people critical of some of the work we're trying to push forward in the climate space. There are extreme thinkers out there providing their own memes. We need to do a good job or a better job of countering with our own creative memes. So I emphasize memes just because this is where a lot of people are conversing in the Facebook, Twitter, Front Porch Forum space. And so how do we successfully, and if folks have some feedback here, once we're done with this PowerPoint, as to memes that you see working in your space, your community, or even your social media network, I hope you highlight them, because we definitely need to share what's working. Another Facebook post, how Vermonters benefit. Good framing here in terms of quality of life. And I'll get to this slide, I'll get to this graphic in a second because I have some thoughts on it. This was an actual case study that EAN wanted to highlight about how Vermonters are benefiting. Again, these posts, 1, 2, and 3, are copy and pastable and provided by EAN. I just pulled it from some of their files so that you can see some of the Facebook posts that they'll be promoting that Ian mentioned will be available to everyone. The #1 tweet, again, strong economic framing. Highly encourage anytime you have an opportunity to lead with economic health security framing, as I mentioned in the previous webinar. EAN does that here. Thankfully, I had a good conversation with Sarah at EAN before they released their report and was encouraging them in their press release and of course in their social media to lead when and where possible with economic framing, just because it's the strongest frame, especially for fiscal conservatives in the state, especially for a state that is struggling with its budget and tax revenue, et cetera. Lead with economic framing when and where possible. This does. Second tweet recommended, again with a visual. Anytime you tweet or use Facebook, try to use visuals. People love visuals, whether it's a graphic from the EAN report or a beautiful picture of Vermont or something with solar or anything, the vision we're trying to provide for the future. Anytime you can use visuals, the better. Text-heavy stuff, not so effective on social media. Keep it light on text, heavy on imagery. This one talking about transportation being the biggest energy challenge. This is going to be a tough one for the state because we're so spread out and we're accustomed to driving. And so as we think about better mass transit options, better development visions for the future in terms of planning and development in such a way where you don't have to drive from point A to point B, it's going to be essential for all of our towns. Certainly, this is front and center for Brandon as we think about infill development or sprawl and making sure that it's pedestrian friendly, bike friendly, et cetera. Another tweet from EAN, sample tweet, in terms of bending the curve and our emissions. A good visual should accompany this, and I know EAN has some good graphics that we can use. This is a tweet from them as a recommendation. This is where, for those of you who aren't actively using Facebook and Twitter and are mindful of the conversation that's definitely happening in Front Porch Forum, here are some ways to engage. Again, text from EAN, sample text for their Front Porch Forum post. #1, what can we do to reduce emissions in Vermont? I like the question mark there because that does engage a conversation and people can then find out more, as you see with the text here. Another Front Porch Forum post, what do we gain when we don't spend money on fossil fuels? Going back to the economic framing, quality of life framing, health security framing, some opportunities to talk here. Now, what I'd like to get into are moments, because if you go to Google News and see what's trending nationally or globally around climate change, all you have to do is news.google.com or whatever your search engine preferences, Yahoo, Bing, etc. And type in climate change, you'll see the latest study. And I just did it 5 minutes ago and found a PNAS study that CNN featured, that talks about how a walk in the woods will be a rarer opportunity going forward. And Proceedings on the National Academy of Sciences, PNAS put forward this study this week. CNN did a nice story on it about how our forests will be changed forever from climate change. This is a no-brainer for us. We all know this to be true. But when a study comes out, this is your opportunity to pivot off the news, to use that moment and to weigh in with Vermont Digger, Burlington Free Press, Bennington paper, Brattleboro paper, whatever your paper is, paper in Montpelier, Times-Argus, Rutland Herald, etc. And there's some feedback on someone's audio. If you don't pressing mute, because I'm hearing, I'm guessing others are hearing it as well. So if you don't have mute on, please put your mute on. Thanks. So if you go to news.google.com right now and type in climate change, you'll find that same study. You'll find a CNN story about how walk in the woods will be a rarer opportunity, and it's that PNAS study. How do we use that moment to weigh in with any of our local papers? And I'm going to showcase here what you're looking at is a piece that ran. I was doing some research over the weekend, and this story, this is a couple days old now. But this story, as you see the title, NBC News ran it, Republicans who believe in climate change seek alternative to Green New Deal. It talks about all the Republicans in Congress who are advocating for climate policy. Now, granted, their policy is going to be different than maybe the policy we wish for here on this call. I don't know, I can't speak for everyone on the call. But what the article does do is it mentions all the Republicans who are talking about climate change in Congress, which is awesome. What can we do with that? Well, we can pluck those names, those Republican members of Congress who are talking about climate change and the policies that they're calling for, including a carbon tax. That in this article that you're looking for, you're looking at, not for, you're looking at, you will find, all you have to do is copy the title and Google it and you'll find it. You'll find Republicans talking about a carbon tax. Now, why is that beneficial? Well, we can take that, leverage that, extrapolate from that and say to Governor Scott, hey, your fellow party members in Congress are calling for a carbon tax. Let's do the same in Vermont. And so how do we take a news story like this and featured Republican members of Congress on the record talking about a carbon tax, parlay it back to Vermont and say, hey, Governor Scott, and any other Republicans we want to mention in state legislature, we need you to do the same. Your compatriots, your comrades in Congress are calling for this. Let's do so here at home. So I'm mentioning that that's a moment we can capitalize. Now, what do we do to build out that 700-word piece that you're going to write for the Times-Argus, or the Rutland Herald, or the Burlington Free Press? We're going to focus on the economic framing. We've got it here. EAN has done the work for us. Let's get as much mileage out of this. We can also say this report just released shows that 78% of all energy dollars are leaving the state. We want to keep them here. Let's keep them here. Let's grow that 22 to 44. Let's grow that 44 to 66. Governor Scott, we need your help. Republicans in Congress are calling for it. Another great economic framing is this. Now, there are a couple ways you could spin this. I would encourage, given that you're seeing fewer clean energy jobs in 2018 than you saw in 2017, I would frame it as a lost economic opportunity. Whereas we were on a growth trajectory, we were growing our clean energy jobs. We want jobs in Vermont. We know we need to bring new jobs to Vermont. We were incentivizing people to move to Vermont for $10,000 over 2 years. So we know that the state and the governor cares about more people in the state working and paying tax monies, tax revenue to the state. So this is a great opportunity to say, we were on a great trajectory. This was providing strong economic stimulus and economic growth to our state. We have, however, faltered over the last year. Let's grow those numbers. Let's get to 20,000. Let's get to 21,000. Let's get to 22,000. It's going to provide an economic stimulus to our state and be good for economic growth in the state. Another good graphic from the EAN report that is economic framing is this one, Going Electric Saves Money. What can we do in our writings for the Times-Argus, Rutland Herald, Burlington Free Press, Brattleboro Reformer, Bennington papers, using these numbers to make the economic case for going electric? Not the climate case for going electric, the economic case for going electric, using this data. Again, saying, new report out by EAN says we can save money. Help Vermonters save money. They love the economic framing. Another one is a comparison to Quebec. EAN did have a comparison to California. I was trying to think, what are Vermonters going to be most motivated by? And Quebec and California are tough because California they can dismiss, like true Vermonters are like, oh, that's California, they're different than us. Not that Canada is a great stimulus, but at least Quebec is a little closer, and people have likely some connection to Quebec more so than California. Your call on which is better comparison, but again, showing that we can reduce emissions and grow. It's not going to hurt our economy. People who have criticized us on the carbon tax, whether it's Ethan Allen Institute or anyone else, have claimed that it would hurt the economy. It won't hurt the economy. Here are some good examples of states and provinces that are aggressively cutting emissions in a regulatory manner and seeing their economic growth skyrocket at the same time. Here's another story that's coming out. You all know you're tracking with the student protests around the world. I like this title in terms of adults not taking climate change seriously. So we, the youth, are forced to strike. So I think folks are familiar with the Greta Thunberg and others, incredible student movement, student striking happening globally. So what's this framing? This is an adult responsibility framing. Like, are we going to step up and be adults, be responsible? And here is where I wanted to highlight a couple of EAN's work, their graphics. This graphic needs to be deconstructed. It's an intense graphic, hard to communicate in one glance. So I would want to, if I was writing an op-ed using this, like, hey, we need to be adults, be responsible, economic framing is strong here. You just have to pull out the specific comparisons in terms of energy savings, all the savings that are available to you after, we'd want to just quantify that in the piece so that the economic case, the adult responsibility case is made clear. But I'm just highlighting this because I hope we do use it. It's a case study we should use. People love specific examples. Let's use this and then do the comparison on the 76 BTUs versus 33, the energy savings, the cost savings available. You see the emissions comparison there too. So, and then the savings at the bottom, there's some numbers there that will be useful to you. So in the adult framing, the adult responsibility framing, pivoting off a moment in the press where students are leading because adults don't. Here's another graphic I really like from EAN. You'll see the more sustainable fuels being less volatile in the market. So the bagged wood pellets, the cold climate heat pumps, and the wood chips have the most sustainable trending line, not influenced by the market as much as propane, fuel oil, and natural gas are. A smart fiscal conservative in terms of betting on an energy would bet on those energies, those fuels that aren't as volatile in the market. And so if we want to make a strong economic and security framing, and if we want to do it about, all right, we're going to be adults, we're going to lead, we're going to be responsible, this would be a good data point to use. Let's rely on fuels that aren't as volatile. If we want a strong, secure, economically stable state, let's rely on fuels that are ideally in state, so we're not sending so much energy dollars out of state, 75% of those dollars going out of state, and let's invest in fuels that aren't volatile in the marketplace. So again, these are all strong arguments to be made to people who maybe don't acknowledge climate change, don't want to acknowledge climate change, but can appreciate security argument, economic growth argument, stability in the marketplace argument, etc. Last moment that I want to identify, this is a study that also came out recently, March 10th, you see the date there, how climate change is fueling extremism. So as we think about security issues, this health security frame I wanted to highlight, and this is again from the EAN report in terms of health and respiratory health. So as we think about security, how can we talk about securitizing the health of Vermonters so that they are not vulnerable to any of the particulates, fossil fuel, contaminants, emissions, etc. But again, not having to talk about climate change, but solely focusing on health security frame. So I just want to quickly end this conversation before we get into hopefully some back and forth and some Q&A. If you don't know where to go for some of these outlets, basically the easiest way to find them is to Google the name of your preferred outlet and opinion or submissions or commentary, and you'll find this. So here, Vermont Digger is saying they publish 12 to 8 commentaries a week on a broad range of community sources. from a broad range of community sources. And we have a minimum length of 400 words. Ideal length is 600 to 800 words, which is why I've said 700 words in the past, because that's a nice balance. And they'll do some copy editing, and they'll want you to source and cite your work so you have good data to back it up. So make sure you hyperlink any data that you source or cite. And then here's where you can send it. You can send it to Kate and Anne. They're the email addresses. Send them 700 words. Don't send them 1,000 words or 1,200 words and apologize. They're like, oh, I couldn't edit it down. Don't do that. Send them 700 words, 600 words. Make sure you fact check it. Make sure you copy edit it 5, 10 times, because you always miss something. Because they're very busy and they're culling through so many opinion pieces. Ideally, if yours is newsworthy, it's pivoting off a moment in the news cycle, which is why I mentioned those previous articles that ran, and also when I did a 5-minute Google before this call started, found the PNAS Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences report on forest. Vermont Digger, hey, this study just came out, both from EAN and from PNAS, and I've written this 700-word piece as it relates to Vermont. Hope you consider it. Here it is for your consideration. Burlington Free Press, same thing. They're My Turns, which is what they call it, about 700 words. That's where you can send it. Same thing. Make it relevant to Vermont, pivot off the news cycle, make sure you capture that moment in the news cycle. Editors love that because they want their stuff to be time sensitive and newsworthy in nature. Times Argus, same thing. This is their letters to the editor, but they also, of course, accept op-eds, 700-word op-eds. So I'm pushing this because we've got a couple weeks for traction on EAN, because we can still say this month EAN's report came out, we're weighing in. You have a window. A couple months will go by and we can still reference the EAN report, but we really definitely have a window right now, because we can say EAN report just came out and this study in the global news cycle just came out. Love to write this piece on 700 words. We can try to seize that moment a couple months from now, but there is a short window after a report comes out or a study comes out. We've got a couple weeks to submit something, so let's seize that moment now. Now, I would like to turn it over. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it back to Ian. And I just want to identify what I would love to talk about is thoughts on some of the Front Porch Twitter and Facebook posts, and any memes that are working for all of you in your use. And then any thoughts from all of you. Have you tried to run 700-word pieces before? Does this seem accessible to you? Do you think you could do it, or does this seem insurmountable or too difficult? Or when you think of 700 words, you're like, oh, what do I write about? Curious your thoughts on, have you tried to seize the news cycle and submit something to your local paper? What was your experience? Did you get published? Did you get good feedback? And let's get into a conversation about how we best use these moments and means right now over the next couple weeks. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to kick it back to all of you.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Michael, for that overview. So let's make sure, if people do have questions, I think probably the best way to make sure that we're getting them into the conversation is to type them into the chat bar, so that we're not kind of double clicking mute buttons a lot. If people do want to try to unmute themselves to ask a question out loud, that is perfectly fine. We'll create a few minutes to have this conversation. And then when we've talked through some of the EAN report analysis, I'll just give a brief overview of kind of where some of the legislative action is, where we're at as far as putting forward the climate action plan that we've discussed, and share just a few more thoughts on how online engagement and memes have been used in the legislative arena as well. So we've got a question here. Interested to hear about in-person presentations to your town at town meeting or select boards or similar groups which may not be completely committed to climate action.
Yeah, so thankfully, in thinking about the energy plan, those of you working on your town energy plans, and as Ian mentioned, I chaired my town's energy committee. Thankfully, what the state did was bake into that process motivation, incentive for the town to engage a town energy plan. Not a lot of towns were initially excited by the prospect of it, and I'm thinking of some towns down here that may not be excited by it, but the incentive is that a town gets substantial deference in negotiating the site of a big solar array, for example, if they've completed their energy plan and the regional planning commission approves it. Thankfully, some of these incentives are baked into the process so that a town has good reason to engage. And Brandon, my town, is doing quite well on solar sites, which is great. We have 100+ solar sites, and that's a mix of residential and commercial. So we're working well on our way towards our goals as part of the state 90 by 2050 goals. You know, I'd think of any economic framing possible. So I don't know if it's possible to take the big numbers and drill them down into smaller numbers so that you've got specific economic data for your town or for your region. That's going to be tougher versus kind of statewide numbers that we've got, 78% versus 22%, 78% leaving the state versus the 22% staying in the state. But if you don't have local numbers, which, and I'm guessing EAN doesn't, just because it would be too hard to distill down into town-specific impact, how do we best use that data to compel select boards that are potentially conservative or not necessarily on board with climate change? Again, I would make an entirely economic argument. I'll give another example. I'm the chair of my town's planning commission. We're about to encounter river corridors work, and my town floods a lot when we have big storms. And so those river corridors need to be protected. We need to create a buffer around them and not build inside 50 feet on each side of the river corridor. Well, the state, again, smartly baked into that process an economic incentive that if you do enact these river corridor, it's not really bylaws, but into your land use ordinance language, that the state will increase the reimbursement anytime, you know, another, God forbid, Hurricane Irene comes to the state of Vermont, that you'll get an extra 7.5% reimbursement on damage done based on flooding. So you're incentivized as a town to enact this language around river corridors, because otherwise you would lose out on 7.5% reimbursement. So there's a financial incentive there. So again, we don't have to talk about ecology or biology or climate anything, I think, in any of these conversations. Let's just go in with good data. And some of the slides I highlighted today offer that. And EAN, any graphics around EAN that we can use that are economically focused or health security focused, let's lead with those first and foremost, because it does set up a difficult proposition for anyone listening to it, because if they say no to it, they're saying no to cost savings, they're saying no to better health for their residents. So we obviously want to give them an opportunity to say yes, because that's ideally what we want them to do. But versus a climate debate, we're having an economic conversation about saving money for the town, better health for the town, etc.
Got another question that came in here. Policymakers are often swayed more by stories than facts. What are your suggestions for weaving in personal stories into commentaries / testimony / advocacy, etc.?
Fully agree. And one of the reasons why EAN likely had that house with a personal case study from Jericho is that, one, they wanted to ground it in fact. So we have to do our best every time we talk about this stuff to ground it in a real study, a real source, a real citation. Otherwise, we get dismissed. So I never want us to be like, you know, thousands of green jobs are available to us without having a specific number, ideally, like 22,000 green jobs, and data to back it up so that we can never be dismissed for doing poor research. So having a good anecdote, not a generic anecdote, but if we are going to use a case study or a personal story, let's find it, highlight it, make sure the person is okay with us using it first, and then telling that story is compelling. Now, I like to couple a story with good facts. So a journalist you'll see in a newspaper will often lead with a story. They'll be like, let's say they're talking about immigration, they'll lead with a story about someone who is going from Ecuador, Mexico to the US, and then they'll zoom out and talk about the policy. They'll do a macro analysis, and then they'll finish with some bookend on that person's story. Same with us. We could lead with the story because that's compelling, that gets someone's attention, especially if it's a constituent. The policymaker is going to be more inclined to listen. And then we go out, zoom out on the macro. The macro in this case is Vermont state and the monies associated with our energy dollars leaving the state. And then we could perhaps finish with the anecdote. I want to also mention, and Ian and I talk about this a lot, how easy it is to send this stuff to our state representatives and senators. So, just engaging weekly, bi-weekly, monthly with our reps over email or phone, just so that they're regularly hearing from us. Now, will my state reps always be like, "Oh, Michael, I'm on it. I'm going to attend to this"? Nope, probably not, and that's okay. And I will continue to drumbeat positively and diplomatically in a friendly way, so that they're constantly hearing from me, and I hope the same goes with you, that it's a regular drumbeat. So they're hearing from us, that they're, even if they're not always acknowledging, and even if they're not acting on it, they are constantly hearing from us, phone, email, in person, and they're hearing from us in the press. The local papers are publishing our stuff, so they're hearing from us 3 to 5 different ways every month, every quarter.
Great. I think that is a perfect segue into my portion of the presentation. I'm going to dive a little bit more into some of the local legislative action. And I just want to preface this by saying that I think it is very important, and one of the most impactful things that we can do is making sure that our lawmakers are hearing from us on a consistent basis about the importance and urgency of making climate action a priority on the local level. I mean, anecdotally, one of the things that we've heard from some legislative leaders is that they don't necessarily always feel as though people are talking about things as much in their communities, which is always frustrating for me to hear, because I know that you all and we all are out there doing what we can to get the message across that climate action is urgent and necessary and beneficial for Vermont. But when I hear those things coming from under the Golden Dome, it makes me think that there is more work that we have to do and more opportunity that we have to really move the needle on climate and make sure that no self-respecting lawmaker can say, "I'm not hearing from my constituents about climate change," because we are all going to be doing the work that we need to do to get that message across. So I'm going to start by sharing presentation that I had put together, and I could not start a presentation like this without talking about a meme that I uncovered just this morning. So when there's a huge solar energy spill, it's called a nice day. Getting into some of the kind of safety and security messaging frames that Michael has talked about, really wanting to make sure that people are aware that, when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about it in a way that resonates with lawmakers and is just kind of funny, engaging, and fun. So I would encourage everybody on this webinar and in their communities to feel empowered to share memes like this one whenever they come across them, because those can be often ways of opening the door to a conversation and just getting this information out there.
Ian,
yeah.
Quick flag. I'm just seeing a white screen, and I'm also seeing
Let me see if I can.
That a commenter, someone on the line, is also saying that the presentation isn't coming. There we go.
There it is. It just needed me to jog it a bit. Thank y'all. So there's the meme that I was discussing. Came across it this morning, and I couldn't let it go. So I just want to give a brief overview to folks on this webinar of kind of some of the significant climate legislation before the legislature currently. I'll dive into, this will be a quick hits overview. So H51 and S66 are bans on new large-scale fossil fuel infrastructure in Vermont. We've got some bills authorizing Vermont to join multi-state carbon pricing program with emphasis on heating and transportation, not just electric fuels. Of particular importance to local energy committees may very well be H423, which has the effect of essentially lifting what currently exists as a $500 kilowatt net metering cap for towns and schools. So essentially, even if a town school or a town fire station they're all of those uses of solar power are considered kind of one customer under current net metering rules, which means that there can be a limit on the amount of solar that various departments of a town, such as the town hall, the schools, some municipal buildings, can engage with. And so we want to make sure that is something that is dealt with. There's been a reintroduction of the Essex plan, carbon pricing plan that first came out last year. Then H477, a 10-year plan to really aggressively deal with trying to get at some of the bigger equity and economic issues through carbon pricing and other means. And then the passage of a Global Warming Solutions Act to try to get Vermont's climate energy goals to be enforced and something that are really considered when state policymakers are making their decisions. So these dovetail with the climate action plan that we've discussed before that has kind of these 4 key points that I'll highlight here: doubling the number of low and moderate income homes weatherized, creating an electric vehicle incentive program, enacting the Global Warming Solutions Act, and analyzing and applying the results of the Joint Physical Office's decarbonization study to advance policies that can help us deal with carbon pollution while reducing emissions and growing jobs. So I'm going to flag just a couple of the highlights, the things that we think are moving most quickly, and some messages that we think would be useful for people to put out in the public space. So for doubling the number of low and moderate income homes weatherized each year, this is an issue that I feel very acutely, because having been kind of a relatively low to moderate income renter in Vermont, I know how expensive it can be to live in a home that isn't fully weatherized when you're paying a lot of money to essentially be cold, and that's something that weatherization can really address. So some of the key messages around weatherization that we'd encourage people to get out in the public sphere and in their communities is that weatherization can help Vermonters stop wasting money. It can help them be more comfortable. It can enhance public health. There was a report that came out from the Vermont Department of Health last December that really made clear all of the benefits that come from weatherization above and beyond heating comfort. Also, cases of asthma, respiratory health, less instances of mold or environmental damage in the home. So this is one issue that we would encourage people to speak about in their communities and with their lawmakers. Using the VW settlement dollars as a strategic investment to encourage low and middle income Vermonters to be able to access electric vehicles. This is an area where we have kind of some one-time money that came into the state through settlement dollars from the consumer protection settlements that were filed from the Volkswagen emissions cheating scandal, where the Volkswagens were essentially saying that their cars were running cleaner than they were when they were being tested. And so there's a pot of money that is available to the state as a result of some consumer settlements. And one of the things that we're pushing for is that money goes toward electric vehicle incentives and programs to make sure that we are getting more EVs on the road, trying to get at, in part, the transportation issue that is where many and the vast majority of our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from. The Global Warming Solutions Act, there's actually testimony being taken on this bill, perhaps if not as we speak, when this webinar began. And this is trying to learn from some of our neighbors in New England, such as Massachusetts and Connecticut, to require that agencies really think about greenhouse gas reduction and have to demonstrate and prove that they are considering the climate impacts of decisions that they're making. So it doesn't determine how we get our greenhouse gas emission goals met, but it does require that we demonstrate that they are being taken into consideration, which would be a significant step. And this is something that we hope may very well be passed. As you all know, climate change comes at significant cost. Again, trying to think about local images and memes to try to make this hit home. This was a picture from Mad River Glen a few years ago when they were facing extreme weather and they couldn't offer skiing this season. So they just said uncle and put it on their sign. and I love this picture. I saw my supervisor use it in a presentation before, and anytime that we have the opportunity to kind of bring these issues closer to home in our own communities and where we live, I think it can be incredibly powerful and incredibly impactful. So I wanted to show an example of kind of a way that I have seen some of these bills be effectively promoted on social media. So this was shared by a friend of mine, congratulating one of the reps, Selena Colburn, from co-sponsoring H477, the Vermont Equity and Infrastructure Act, and asking fellow representatives to join in supporting that bill. And what I love about this post is a couple of different things. So it links to some resources about the bill. In this case, it's a link to a video that was produced about it. It also tags the lawmakers directly, so they are sure to see this and be brought into the conversation. And it uses the Act on Climate VT hashtag, which is something that we're trying to promote. It's what we use on our Friday climate dispatches, and a variety of our other climate posts, and just trying to build up that hashtag as a centralizing force for posts on climate. So I bring up this post as an example of a way that one could pretty quickly and pretty easily express support for some of the bills that I mentioned above, and kind of effectively tagging lawmakers and their pages as a result of that. I also wanted to just flag some upcoming or very recent moments that are opportune and key to take advantage of as we're talking about communicating climate in our communities. This is the headline from a story in VT Digger about 16 towns that have passed town meeting climate change resolutions, 350 Vermont, organized with a wide variety of communities, both last year and then last week at town meeting, and everywhere where they were able to bring the town meeting climate resolutions to the floor, they were approved. So at this point, over 20% of Vermont towns in town meeting have said that they support and want to see aggressive climate action. And so I think that's something important to highlight, particularly as town meeting is still fresh in many of our minds. Michael talked about this, but I also wanted to remind people about the upcoming youth strikes for the climate on March 15th. I'm aware of at least 3, I'm sure there are more schools and students that are planning to do climate strikes in solidarity with a global youth climate strike, inspired by Greta Thunberg and kind of the work that's been going on in Europe. This is a really exciting opportunity to kind of amplify and support the voices of young people who are going to be living in a world racked by climate crises that get increasingly worse the longer we put off meaningful action. So coming up this March 15th, I know kind of one of the big events will be here in Montpelier with Montpelier High School and Harwood to the school, or rather a march from the school to the State House, and then having a press conference testifying before some committees. And I know that like schools in Brattleboro and Hartford and many other towns across the state are there as well. So that would be an opportunity to help support and bring up those youth voices and try to increase the sense of urgency and pressure on our lawmakers to be adults that are acting responsibly with the world that is in our common care. And then just something else to put on y'all's radar screen. Again, 350 Vermont is organizing a climate solutions walk on April 5th through 9th. Going to be walking from Middlebury to Montpelier, and then having a rally and event in Montpelier. So they're asking for people interested to consider participating in the walk or supporting it in other ways. So I bring these up as kind of opportunities to think about ways to engage online social media and kind of moments to take advantage of to make sure that we are giving the climate crisis the attention and urgency that it deserves. And then I like to end many of my presentations with this slide, kind of one of my favorite meme-like climate slides. I'm sure many of you have seen this one already, but talking about a climate summit and what if it's a big hoax and we created a better world for nothing? We created energy independence, green jobs, livable cities. And I appreciate this as a reminder that, and this is something that I think comes across in Michael's advice and presentations as well, is that, we're not just talking about saving the environment in the abstract, or polar bears on the Arctic, important as all of that is. But we're really talking about, trying to create a more secure, safe, livable, and just world while addressing the climate crisis at the same time. So, I think we are all on the right side of history here, and can be proud to be doing what we can in conversations in our communities, on Front Porch Forum, through writing op-eds, through kind of sharing the EAN report things, and just trying to make sure that, in particular elected officials, but also people within our communities, understand that, climate change is a real threat, but that addressing it is a real opportunity to do some real good.
Ian,
So
can you go back to your slide that has all the legislation
yes,
being proposed? The first two, if folks can look at H51, Senate 66, H91, Senate 75, ban on new large-scale fossil fuel infrastructure, and then authorizing Vermont to join a multi-state carbon pricing program. So if you remember on my last webinar, when I talked about the three emotions that track with viral images, stuff that gets shared on social, and as we think about memes, the three emotions that correlate strongly with the most viral images, the most shared images, are happiness, surprise, and admiration, which is why Ethan included some memes of his own in terms of imagery and cartoons. And if you don't know where to start in terms of creative memification, if you just go to Google and Google meme ban fossil fuels as an example, to look at H51 Senate 66. If you just go to Google and Google meme ban fossil fuels, you'll see a bunch of memes already in use. Feel free to use those, make use of existing memes. And then the same with carbon pricing. If you do a meme on carbon pricing, Google search meme carbon pricing, you'll find some fun ones there as well. So in thinking about the social media space, how to build an effective meme, think about happiness, think about surprise, think about admiration. You can find what already exists online and make use of it so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but have fun in the space. And it's obviously a serious issue, and I'm encouraging you to have fun with it, but it is what helps gain traction online.
Absolutely. So a couple things to follow up on all the things you presented. So I will reach out to Sarah Wolf from the Energy Action Network, who put together those graphics and who's coordinating the kind of weekly social media blast from the EAN reports. And I'll try to see if attendees of this webinar can be added to that email chain so that you all can be getting the emails from them, and we can be coordinated as to when we're putting those out. I'm glad we went back to this slide, because one other thing I would want to flag for folks is that we are approaching crossover in the legislature, which is essentially the date by which bills have to have passed the committee in which they were introduced in one chamber in order to be considered in the other. So for instance, if H51, one of the fossil fuel bans, didn't pass the House Energy and Technology Committee this week, the Senate would not be able to think of that bill, and that bill wouldn't be able to pass this session. Now, in the life cycle of bills, it is very true that there are many bills that don't make crossover one session that can make it the next. So that doesn't mean a bill is dead, but we will have a better sense after the 15th for most bills, and after the 22nd of March for bills that involve kind of finance or revenue or appropriation, kind of which of these policy proposals and which of these areas are actually moving and could be worthy and deserving of additional kind of support from the grassroots, along the lines that the slide that we showed earlier.
So I just want to give as an example something I would like to do. And Ian, I would love to get this slide from you, because I could see myself just taking what you've got, which is simple and clear and efficient, and sending it to my reps and senator and say, hey, are you on this? Would love for you to get on all of these. If not, please do know that I support you joining all of these and supporting all of these as sponsors. So I don't know if that's an effective approach for other folks, but just as an example, this is how I might follow up with my reps.
Great. So we're coming up on 2 o'clock, or I'm rather on 3, and I want to make sure that we've spent some time here in the last 5 minutes for folks to ask any questions that have come up, either regarding Michael's presentation or my own. We'll do our best to answer whatever questions you guys have. Want to make sure that you all feel like this can be a space where you can workshop, be creative, throw out your ideas for how you might communicate in your communities, and let us know kind of if these presentations are helpful, and which of these things how we can make these webinars be really engaging and lively and useful space. So I'm seeing a question, which of the legislative actions are on the table? I will say that from what I know, I think of the ones that are displayed on this slide currently, the Global Warming Solutions Act seems like it has some potential and momentum to pass and get through crossover. There's also been significant work in some of the appropriations committees on both reauthorizing existing low-income weatherization programs and then some pushes to increase weatherization funding to try to get to that doubling of weatherization for homes weatherized that is in the climate action plan. The other bill is less clear on. Again, we'll have a better sense after crossover. It can always be, all the committees are feeling the pressure of crossover when they decide kind of what's going to get through and what's not. So we'll be able to better answer that question in the coming weeks once that crossover deadline has passed. Any other questions for Michael or myself out there in the World Wide Web? And I also want to make sure that people on the phone feel as though they can speak up as well. So I realize you probably can't tap into it or type into a chat bar, but want to make sure that folks who are joining us the old-fashioned way can ask questions as well. All right, well, hearing none and seeing as how we're creeping up on our 3 o'clock deadline, first of all, I want to thank you, Michael, for once again sharing your time and expertise. As folks are, thinking about how to engage in their communities, via letters to the editor, memes, graphics, front porch forum, whatever it is, please do feel free to reach out both to Michael and myself. Michael's provided his email afterwards. We will be sharing the slides from this presentation in addition to a recording of it, so that folks can get some ideas as they're thinking about how to effectively communicate in their communities. And we'll be, again, continuing to hold this webinar series the second Tuesday of the month at 2 o'clock. So looking forward to seeing you all in April as we talk about kind of communicating in climate more. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you for all of your good work in your communities, and we will be in touch.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, everyone.